So welcome everyone. I can see that you're joining us. I'll just take a moment till I've got more people with us. Okay, so the numbers have slowed down, so we'll see. So welcome everyone to this webinar on doing action learning with trusts and foundations. My name is Sonja Antell, and I'm one of the directors of Action Learning Associates. And we've got Becky with us, who won't have her screen on, and she's in the background doing technical stuff. So thank you for that, Becky. And Ruth, did you want to say a word?
Hi, I'm Ruth Cook. I'm the founder and managing director of Action Learning Associates. Good to be with you all.
So we're aiming for about 45 minutes. And in a moment, just a moment, we'll open a poll. In fact, no, actually, we'll open the poll now. We've got a sort of joining poll. So I'll get Becky to set that up for us. And can I just check while you're doing that, can people hear me? And if so, could you put a note in the chat function, just somebody, so that we know that we can be heard? While Ruth and I can hear each other, it's be good to know some. Yes, so somebody can hear you. Thank you, Bethan, for that. Great, lovely, thank you. Okay, thanks, William. Great, it's just a bit strange. It's a bit one way, so it's good to have that feedback. So how this is going to work, we're going to do approximately half an hour of slides and a video and a conversation. And then we're going to finish up with 15 minutes Q&A. And 4 questions that occur to you during the programme, during this slot here. Could you post them in the Q&A, which is again at the bottom of the screen, and on my screen it's to the left of the chat function. And then we'll moderate those in about 20 minutes and be able to talk to them. So thank you for the poll. I don't think it's finished yet. While we're doing practical stuff, another housekeeping point is you will all get a follow-on email with a link to the webinar. So should anything, awkward or technical or whatever go awry, don't worry, you will get the link, and it will be available on our site in a couple of days. So everybody will get that. So let me just look at the poll. So yeah, we've got some people working for a foundation and others working with them in a freelance capacity. A spread of experience for action learning, which is interesting. And a majority of people working in the third sector, which actually does make sense in terms of the material that we've publicised here. So we're going to finish the poll now. Thank you for that. Thank you, everyone. So I'm going to, if you give me a moment, I'm going to share my screen and start the PowerPoint. It's not a long PowerPoint, so just to reassure you, just start it. So welcome and thank you. And so just a word about what this next 45 minutes is going to look like. We're going to have a few words about the context, about trusts and foundations in the UK at the moment. And then I'm going to hand over to Ruth, who's going to talk about action learning, specifically in trusts and foundation. She's going to cover our approach, what it can add to a programme, how it helps with effective and useful, productive, functioning networks in the sector, and some words from funders in terms of how that might work for people. And finally, we'll finish up with lessons that we've learned, and then we'll move over to Q&A. And we have got a very short extra video, which isn't Ruth and I, or it is Ruth and a funder, where you can actually hear somebody talking about it, which you might be interested to see. So that's how it looks. And as I said, if you've got any questions as we go, feel free to put them in the Q&A, and we'll come to them in about 20 minutes. So that's good with people. I'll just get going. Yep. So a word about trusts and foundations. It's useful really just to set the context. Trusts and foundations are a major feature in the UK charitable landscape. The Association of Charitable Foundations, which many of you may know of or have heard of, ACF, is its sort of banner. They estimate that there's more than 10,000 trusts and foundations nationwide, which is kind of amazing, really, really huge number. they distribute more than 2 million in grants to other small charities and organisations annually and consistently. There is a difference between trusts and foundations, and that's in their legal status, although in some ways it's not of great consequence because both have got a lot of freedom, a lot of liberty, if you like, to act within their charitable objectives. And as a result, you see some really innovative work done in this sector, really creative, really imaginative, not constrained by, by statutory responsibilities that local authorities and others have. So that's just a word about the context that we're talking about. I'm going to hand over to Ruth for a few words about action learning in this context. So there you are, Ruth, and let me know when you want me to move from one slide to another in case I misread it.
Thank you. So action learning is a term that is now used to describe many things. It's the kind of downside of action learning having become so popular, is that people use it to describe anything that's got a bit of action in it, or anything that's, I've heard of outdoor learning and that kind of experiential stuff being described as action learning just because there's a lot of activity. But what our approach to action learning consists of, and it's often described as the classic or a pure action learning approach. So we're very much base ourselves on the Reg Revens model. He was the founder of action learning. And I think we're proud to say that we are purists. We believe in the rigor and the discipline of action learning. So what is our approach? Well, we have a model that we use. It doesn't mean that we can't vary that model according to the context, but we believe that there's a tried and trusted process. And the key ingredients of that process are, as it says here, active listening, open questions, and reflective learning. So there's an opportunity for one person to bring a challenge to their peers in an action learning set, and for that to be explored in some depth through open questions to create action, and for the whole group then to reflect on their learning. We very much believe in the value of facilitation. There's a lot of bad practice out there. So I've even heard of groups, this was in universities, being given a handout on action learning, put into a group and just told to get on with it. And unsurprisingly, their experience is often not very good. So we believe that it's essential, at least in the first contract period, for sets to have someone who holds the process, models the questions, and creates safety and trust within the group. So what might it add to a programme? And it's possible that action learning is built in and is within the structure of a programme, or it might follow on from a programme and a place where people reflect on their learning, reflect on how they're applying their learning, reflect on the changes that they've made as a result perhaps of funding from a grant or a foundation. So it's time with a small group of peers, and we know that in the third sector in particular, there's a lot of isolation of small charities, small organisations with chief execs who are really, really stretched and don't have a natural group of peers. So action learning can provide them with that and a place where they can safely talk about what's going on. Within a fellowship programme, what action learning provides is a home group. So you can have a large fellowship programme and then a small group that you relate to in some more detail, that the place where you can really say what's going on for you during the programme and how you're changing. And very often people on fellowship programmes are at points of change in their life, or they're considering big changes in themselves or their organisations, and that's a place where they can safely talk about it, as well as how they're applying the learning from a programme. If I mention a couple of examples, and Sonja can talk about the ones that she's worked with. So the Clore Social Leadership Programme, we worked with Clore in the third sector since they began, and that's 2010. So we've worked with fellows every year since 2010. And I think it says a lot that during that period, the programme has changed enormously. And the only two consistent aspects of it are coaching and action learning. Everything else has changed over the years. So it used to be that action learning was delivered face-to-face in different parts of the country, and people would travel all over the country to get to their action learning set and see each other's home venues, if you like. And now, obviously, we provide virtual action learning, and those are usually in 3-hour sessions for all of the Clore social leadership programs. Yeah, so that's one example. Over to Sonja to talk about Lloyds Bank.
Sure, and just a detail there, Ruth, am I right in thinking that we went virtual with Clore way before COVID? We did, didn't we?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, way before COVID.
There was obviously a big savings to be made, both for time and for expenses, if it delivered virtually. So yes, we've been doing work virtually for eight years.
No, just interesting, because knowing the other two two or three I'm going to speak about, their transitions have been different. So Lloyds Bank Foundation is not it doesn't work in a fellowship program in the same way as Clore does. Lloyds Bank Foundation supports small, innovative charities that do things that the statutory sector doesn't. It covers the whole of the UK. And the aim of the Action Learning Programme for Lloyds Bank Foundation, was to really build capacity in the sector, to reduce the isolation that you heard Ruth speak about for CEOs in these small charities. I recall CEOs saying things to me like, one day I'm speaking to the board or doing a big partnership presentation to maybe even somebody in central government or something, representing and advocating on behalf of my beneficiaries, and next day someone doesn't show up and I'm cleaning the kitchen. So that can happen to a CEO in a small charity, and it's a very isolated position. So really what Lloyds Bank Foundation wanted to do was strengthen capability and capacity. And they started, I think it was 6 years ago, with what we called a regional programme, because they supported charities all over the country. We initially ran a programme up in Manchester and up in Sheffield, where CEOs from entirely different sectors of small charities came together in an action learning programme. And they had no other way of coming together. They weren't natural allies, they weren't in the same sector, but they went through action learning with us and worked on all the kinds of classic issues you'd expect, which might be managing upwards and managing your chair, or performance management, or the challenges of fundraising, or often building partnerships. And some great work came out of those action learning sets. And then, of course, 2 years ago, we moved virtually, and now we've got a much more, in terms of attendance, we've got a much more diverse approach with people who've not been included in the past, like people in Northern Ireland, in fact, are in sets now. The Barnwood Trust application of action learning is quite different. Barnwood Trust is a Gloucester-specific trust, which works to change the conditions systemically for people with mental illness and physical disability in Gloucestershire. And there we're running, or have been running, an action learning set for a peer group of managers. It's quite an unusual application. We don't often do action learning set in teams, in existing teams, but they have very complex work, Barnwood. They're going through a review and a change of the strategy. And this was about helping managers understand the work, develop the strategy, reduce silo working, build trust, work more cooperatively. So those are two different kinds of applications. The Pears Foundation is probably loosely more similar to Lloyds Bank Foundation, and something Pears did, which is just really simple when we were working face to face. As these CEOs didn't know each other, either before, if it was an afternoon set, they'd provide lunch first when we were working face to face. And that meant people just hung out together. And what we found was that people were sort of beginning to extend the action learning event when it was face to face. Meeting early for coffee to talk about a fundraising application, staying later to talk about a performance management issue. So we just really saw with the Pears Foundation, when it was face to face, we really saw the sort of capability and strength and networking in the sector being developed. And that was just great kind of tangible evidence, really. Now for Rank Foundation, I think we're going to hear more from them in just a moment. So on that basis, shall I move on, Ruth?
Yeah, please do.
There we are.
So this is about how a funder might set up a program or consider setting up action learning as part of a program. And this is based on our experience over 12 years. So obviously action learning, goes without saying, incorporates both learning and action. So it's got to include what time to reflect on, what am I doing? What do I need to do differently? How can I do that? And then going away and doing something and reporting back to your group of peers about what action you've taken. So being accountable, if you like, for all the time and attention that you've had from your group of peers. We always say to funders, the content of what people talk about in the action learning set is entirely confidential. And that's really important, that they don't think that it's going back to a funder. They know that they can trust an external facilitator. It makes it easier if it's an external facilitator for there to be that trust, that this is not part of any assessment or future funding possibilities. This is where they can really talk honestly about what's going on in their organisation. We know that it has to be dedicated time, and that's probably one of the hardest things to achieve, that you've got to convince people that this is an expectation, it's an agreement that they're making with the other set members, that they will turn up and that they will safeguard that time, whatever the pressures are around them, and we know they're enormous, but that they that they'll keep attending just whatever. And if there isn't that, it probably doesn't work. If we think of occasions when a set hasn't quite gelled or people haven't felt that it's been really significant for them, it's often because of an attendance problem. So there hasn't been continuity and there hasn't been the trust built up. As we've said already, it can work just as well face-to-face or virtually. I know people are really dying to get back into the room together. I've had a few sets that have started to meet back together, and people are really pleased to do that, but it can work equally well virtually. And as Sonja said, there's lots of advantages to shifting to a virtual model in terms of cost savings and cross-regional learning. Now, this might seem a bit prosaic, good administrative support, but again, we'd say this is absolutely crucial. You need to have someone who's really on the ball and is going to remind everyone of the set meetings, going to send out the calendar invites, going to set up the Zoom calls, and those kind of things really make a set work well. And when we're working with a funder, a trust, or a foundation, we would say, why are you doing action learning? What do you think it might contribute? And how would we know if it had contributed that? And then we can devise a way of measuring as you go through, and at the end, has it met expectations? So that's what we think are the requirements for success. We thought it would be useful if you heard from a customer. So we're going to move to playing a short video, we hope. Hi, I'm Ruth Cook, the founder and managing director of Action Learning Associates. And I want to introduce Caroline Broadhurst, who's the Deputy Chief Executive at the Rank Foundation. Caroline, could you just firstly tell us what you do, what the Rank Foundation does?
Yes, sure. Thanks, Ruth. So yes, I'm the Deputy Chief Executive. The Rank Foundation is a grant-making charity based in the UK. It is a family foundation, so we still have family members from the Rank family who support our work on the trustee board. And we work with lots of small and medium-sized charities and social enterprises right across the UK, and we operate what we call relational engaged philanthropy. So really getting to know the organisations, the leaders within the organisations, and how they work the enterprise within their pursuit of helping change the challenges that we have here in the UK.
Thank you. So tell us how you've used action learning.
Okay, well, Ruth, I was introduced to action learning 10 years ago. Really, I know. So 10 years ago, I took part in something called the Clore Social Leadership Programme. I know you know it well, Ruth, and I was a participant in action learning, and I find it challenging. And anything I find challenging, I follow up with curiosity. So it was the practice that I found that if I stuck with it on a personal level and in my own work, then and you know, practiced it well and stuck with the process, then it could transform conversations and experiences in work. So that was my introduction to it. So about I run a program called the Time to Shine Leadership Program, where we have people who want to get into the social sector, and they have the skills, they have the work ethic, they have, you know, they really want to do this, but they don't have the experience. And we also have lots of charities who really need those skills, but they don't have the resources to support the people. So we pay for those people to come into the charity sector. And part of that offer is learning and development, and a big part of that offer is action learning. So all the participants, and this year we have over 130 in 130 organisations, and they all participate in cohorts of action learning.
And you've also trained internal facilitators, haven't you? Could you talk a bit about why you did that and how that's worked out?
Yeah. And again, through this program, through Time to Shine, we started it some years ago with probably about 10 Time to Shiners, and as you can see that we've really scaled it, and it continues to grow. And we wanted a platform, a dialogue where everyone had a way of communicating and understanding their role and being supported in their many different roles. So we recognized that for facilitators to do this, to understand that, we needed to grow that within the organizations and within the Rank Foundation. So we reached out to our network, and those who had already participated in an action learning set had the opportunity to train with yourselves in action learning. So we've got that high quality right throughout the whole network, and we now have, I think it's at least 18 action learning facilitators who each have at least one group, some of them two, as you can see with the numbers growing, but we have consistency and clarity of purpose right throughout the program.
So it's made it very cost effective for the Rank Foundation, because you've trained the facilitators, and they've had the experience of action learning, you've trained the facilitators, and now they're going off and running action learning sets for you.
It is very cost effective, which of course is a good thing in the charity sector, but equally important to us is about the quality, so that we know, you know, Time to Shine is my baby, so you know, I am pretty precious about it, and I know that with scale I can't do it on my own obviously anymore, but with those trusted facilitators who all understand the power of action learning and about the impact that it can have on each of those Time to Shine leaders, the group of 8 in each cohort, that they in turn use action learning in their organizations and in their home life as well. Our strapline, Ruth, I don't know if you know it, the strapline of the Rank Foundation is a pebble in the pond. So this is a good example of how we, you know, have that impact. We don't know what that is, but by retaining the quality, it makes a big difference.
A pebble in the pond, that's a really great way of describing action learning, as well as the Time to Shine program. So you've touched on this, but what difference would you say action learning has made? What have you gained from using action learning?
So as an organisation, I think the main thing is that I don't have to be in the room. I should say actually our action learning obviously in COVID has been a hybrid of some in person more recently, and the Time to Shine leaders have loved that, connecting and meeting up, but we've also been offering it virtually as well. So wherever that action learning is, I as an individual or my colleagues don't have to be there. We know that quality is there throughout. But for me, the key is that we are developing a whole new generation of social sector leaders who have fantastic listening skills and appreciation of how to help someone find their own solutions and not come up with all the answers that many people like me and you probably in the sector just we always want to have the answer on at the tip of our tongue, and to hold that back and to enable and to empower people to find that themselves. And for me, having this you know, in the DNA of this new generation of social sector leaders is a fantastic start for them in their careers going forward. So and there are many, as you know, I'm a great fan of action learning, but for me that's really important that quality is there, but also that armory in many ways for them, as you know, it's a tough call, the work that we do, and especially those small medium-sized charities working at grassroots level, and they have that appreciation, they have those listening skills, and they have that process to trust and to work through with action learning.
It's fantastic, Caroline, and it's been really fantastic to work alongside you and see how Time to Shine programme has grown. It's a brilliant model for the social sector. Thank you very much, and thank you for taking the time to share this with us today.
Thank you. Thanks, Ruth.
Great.
There we are. So I hope you enjoyed that. I thought it was quite, she's quite articulate, isn't she, Caroline?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
She's wonderful.
So now we're at the part of the webinar where we're going to do Q&A. I mean, there have been some questions there's a couple of questions we've already had, aren't there, Ruth?
Yeah.
One was a kind of easy one. How many CEOs in a trust or foundation set? And I don't know if it's because they are often CEOs. It sounds like a bigger question, but I don't know if you want to take that one.
Yeah, and we might do action learning at all different levels. So they might not be all CEOs. It might be that you pick a particular tier and you aim the action learning at them. But I would say our experience is a maximum of 8 if you're meeting face to face, and a maximum of 6 if you're meeting virtually, if you're meeting online. Another question we've received, Sonja, but before we started, was what are the biggest hurdles in having action learning in trusts and foundations? And can I encourage people to put questions in the Q&A while we're talking? Yeah,
do please. So I think that's a really interesting question because when you were talking, Ruth, you said administrative support sounded, I can't remember your word, prosaic or dull or something. But actually, because trusts and foundations are supporting lots of charities that are distributed around the country or the region, one of the things that's absolutely critical is them having a link so that we've got a way to get in touch with people, and the logistics can get started. So setting up the first meeting is absolutely critical. As soon as the first meeting's happened, then it's quite easy. We happily take on the administration and set future dates and so on. But we won't know the charity, the charity CEOs or whoever they are, the senior managers. We won't know them. So that communication to the CEO and the founder, the charity staff, as to what this is about and why, what they might get out of it, why they should, given they're hugely pressed, give up half a day every couple of months. So, you know, the communication, the what's in it for me message, and the logistics to get started, I'd say are really critical.
Thank you. And there's a question that follows on from that. Rebecca asks, how often would you normally expect people to meet in an action learning set?
Okay.
How many sessions would you set up?
How many sessions? Okay. I can't speak to the Clore approach, but in general, for the ones I've done, we meet 6 times. And we aim for every 6 weeks, but almost inevitably with bank holidays and holidays and things, it's like every 8 weeks. So as a rough rule of thumb, I say 6 meetings over 9 to 10 months. That seems to be what works. Now that we're allowed and we're able increasingly to go back to working differently, we're going back to hoping to go back to something, and I am in one of the programs with the foundation where you have a day, do a full day, followed by 5 half days. And that seems to be a great model when that's available to us.
Yeah, so that additional day, having a whole day at the beginning enables you to really spend time on people understanding what action learning is and getting to know each other as well as experiencing action learning.
Yeah, and I think the getting to know each other bit is really critical. You know, the downtime at lunch and coffee that you don't get when you're working virtually. You know, people find out they've got connections in common or haven't got connections in common and they think they should have, and all this kind of stuff that comes out just when you're spending a bit of time with people.
So Claire asked the question about the level of fees in the sector. What level of fees does this sector generally tolerate? Obviously, it's much less than the corporate sector. You wouldn't expect to be, if you're a sole trader, Claire, I don't know, but you wouldn't expect to be charging the same rate as the corporate sector. And I think there are a range of fees, depending on whether you're a sole trader or whether you're an associate set up as we are. But for action learning, my guide would be that it would be less than what you charge for a training day, but it's more of a facilitated day or a facilitated half day at a slightly lower rate than your training rate for that sector.
I think it's fair to say, I think trusts and foundations, like everywhere, has been affected in terms of fundraising and you know, austerity and so on, with COVID and now the war. So I think there's quite a lot of pressure around things at the moment.
So Callum asks a really interesting questions. You've talked about the power of action learning on developing individual skills and connection with peers and building collective experience. Do you think they could use action learning to aid more radical systems change, thinking outside the binary of organisations, individuals, either in a place-based setting or to scope the development of new infrastructure for a field or sector?
Okay. So I think that's a great question, and I mean I've got immediate example, and you may have others, Ruth.
Yeah.
So there are places where action learning's been used for what we effectively call systemic change, and an example I can give. This isn't a trust and foundation, but it's a sector piece. We did a big piece of work funded by the GLA and working with Newham Local Authority after there was the Winterbourne scandal, Winterbourne abuse scandal, maybe 5 years ago. And that was where it was found that people with learning disability, adults with learning disability living in long-term care had been very poorly treated in a home, I believe it was, or a series of homes in Bristol. So there's money made available and work made available to look at how you could improve provision in that sector, given they are, by definition, people who haven't got a strong voice themselves. And we set up an action learning programme, which was about improving provision for that sector in the whole of Newham. We had people from purchasers, providers, advocates, family members, people in the NHS, I can't remember now, a whole range of stakeholders who worked in the kind of classic action learning approach that Ruth spoke about. And we adapted it using peer consultancy. And I had the happy job of collecting all the actions and ideas, which at the end of each presentation, you know, I took away the flips as we were doing it in those days, and then simply used people's words, copied it all up into themes, and the set all signed off that nothing confidential was difficult for them. And that material became the base of a best practice aspirational document for that area. So slightly complicated, long-winded story, I'm afraid, but the answer is most definitely yes. Well, I don't know if you've got.
Yeah, I'll give you two other examples. One was a piece of work that we did for Lankelly Chase, who are a foundation, and it was, it's going back some time, when it was about the start of social care and the health sectors having to work together. And what Lankelly Chase did was bring all the players in a system together and fund some action learning sessions, which were a variation on our normal way of working, because it included scribing what people said and then turning that into a report with some recommendations about people's early experience of the merging of the social care and health world and what needed to happen for it to work well. And Lankelly Chase then used that in their policy and influencing work. So they weren't in charge of the system, but they were players in the system and they could influence it. Another example would be in the creative sector, creative and cultural sector. And this is, so it wasn't funded by a trust or foundation, it was funded by the organisations themselves. But I think it's an example of where you can really create change through action learning. So these were all the chief execs and directors of all the major arts institutions in a city, a northern city, which I won't name, but they started to meet in an action learning set there, and they're still meeting, I think something like 8 years later, although lots of them have moved on to national positions. But what they did in that city, it was really fantastic, was looked at how the whole system worked in terms of the cultural sector and what needed to change. And then they agreed to cooperate with each other. You know, so traditionally they'd been competitors, and they were still competing for funding, but they built the trust between them so that they could start to operate differently and to influence the city council, to influence the arts council, and really create a vibrant community in terms of arts and cultural institutions in that city. It's amazing what they've achieved, and they've now spawned other action learning sets. So you know, the a succession plan, if you like, for the future leaders in their organisations. And they've also been looking for funding. I haven't established it yet, but a positive action set where they could develop other people within their organisation, people of colour who may have been denied access to positions of power, to bring them on board through action learning.
Wow.
So I think, Sean, I'm not going to answer your question about concrete numbers for fees. So I think, we are out there, and I've been explicit on what guides us, but I'm not going to give you the numbers of what we would actually charge in different sectors. Are there any other questions? We've got a few more minutes if there are any other questions. Can it be internal to a third sector organisation, says Bethan. Thank you, Bethan.
I'm not sure does that mean, would that
in-house?
In-house. Oh yeah, well I guess that's my example of Barnwood Trust. That's an in-house example where that action learning is just happening in that organisation for paid employees. You know, we've got I can't think now, but the grants manager, the HR manager, those people at that level that report to the CEO or to the directors were in an action learning set, which is just finished. So I think the answer is yes, as long as the organisation's large enough.
Yes, I'd give some examples. One of the first organisations we worked with, so again, this is going back 20 years, and it was prior to Cancer Research UK being set up, but it was two cancer charities that merged, and we were brought in because action learning was explicitly used as an organisational development tool within the new structure, and people were put into action learning sets, some who were from the one organization, some who were the other, who still identified really strongly with their old organization, and they were put into action learning sets together. The other big use that Cancer Research UK then made of action learning was it created a way that, for example, fundraisers could talk to scientists. You could be in an action learning set together and find out about each other's worlds. So you could break down some of those departmental silos or professional silos that had existed. And what was great about Cancer Research UK was that action learning got embedded into all of their learning and development programs, and it got introduced to people at an early point in their career. So what was great was that over time those people became more senior in the organization, and they really understood the value of action learning, so it really got integrated. So yes, very definitely you can use it internally into all sorts of organizations, not just third sector. We work in the corporate world as well, and in public sector organizations, and in all of them you can use them internally with a group of peers, with a project management team, with an intact team, although that's complicated, but you can do that, maybe around a theme, all of those purposes. A practical question about the timing, Sonja. How much time does it take for an online session with 6
online session? Generally, we offer 3 to 3.5 hours, and people tend to elect for 3. And you need a break in the middle. And that's kind of fairly well replicates what we do face-to-face, but you'd meet earlier face-to-face and have coffee. If you like, you might say 9:45 for a 10 o'clock start, whereas online we'd say 10 o'clock hard start, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is the general premise that the members of the group support each other to find solutions?
I'd say the general premise is, but it's the individual who's bringing the issue that finds their own solutions, and the group create the conditions whereby that person feels supported enough to do that exploring together, and also sometimes maybe feels challenged enough. There are actually organisations, not a foundation or a trust that I know of, but there are organisations that call action learning sets support and challenge sets, because both of those ingredients are really, really critical. So it's right that the group provides the ingredients and the support for the individual who's talking about their issue, but they don't come up with their solutions for them.
We worked quite a lot in the financial sector at one point, and with the Financial Services Authority as it was then, and I remember they actually called it challenge and support groups. It was the Bank of England who used action learning in that way. Callum asks about whether you can have bigger groups. What's the largest action learning set we've ever had, and how, in terms of managing diversity and ensuring that dynamism is not lost? So I can think of, I can think of sets, and this wasn't our choice, it was kind of imposed on us, but I can name them. It was the Rural Payments Agency, and they were in a mess, and they had action learning that was imposed on all their managers across the country. It was a pretty tricky context to do action learning because they didn't want to be there. And we had 12 people in each set, really tricky. And the way that panned out was that, well, there were always some people who voted with their feet. They didn't want to be there, and surprise, surprise, they missed their train or they missed their plane and they weren't there. So it probably came down to 9 or 10 each time. And then what we would do is set up some observers who'd got a specific brief to look at perhaps the quality of questions in the group, those kinds of things. So they would sit outside of the circle. And the danger if you have too big a groups is that some people can opt out, and not everyone gets the opportunity to ask questions and to really follow a theme and listen to each other and work in a way. Once it's really a mature set, they're kind of working together to pursue and delve, and that's harder to achieve with more than 8. So you can create observer roles, and people alternate being observer and actually get a lot from that experience, and the set gets a great deal from hearing back from them. And the other way that you might cope with really large numbers, especially if you're doing action learning across an organisation, is that you would have a number of action learning sets, and then you would have learning set review days where they came together and shared their learning across the sets. And we've certainly done that on a number of occasions.
Now we're headed towards time. Have we still got some questions we need to answer?
Yeah, we've just got one more from Kevin. Is there a general set of questions that action learning facilitators can use to guide group discussions? And how do you support a group if they're not, and if you're not necessarily an expert in the topic that's being discussed? Sonja, do you want to answer?
So that's 2 questions. So in terms of general questions, I mean, we provide handouts with open questions on them, but really it's any question that's an open question. And by open, it means it doesn't have a suggestion. So not, for example, why don't you talk to your manager, which is open but has a suggestion. More, who could you talk to in your organisation? And you can see the difference there. One is quite wide and leaves plenty of space for someone to explore, and the other is a prompt to talk to their manager. And what was the second part of the question? Sorry, Ruth, I lost it in answering the first. Can
you be a facilitator if you're not an expert in that topic?
Without a doubt. This wasn't a trust or foundation, but I did facilitate something in the tech sector that was to do with a change of platform in a very big global situation, the name of which many of us would know. And I did not understand the substance of many of those presentations, but I always understood enough to be able to ask useful questions. I learned a lot, and what was fascinating was some people in the set, although they were all in the same company, wouldn't necessarily understand their colleagues' jobs in huge detail, if that makes sense. So we had a chemist who was in charge of, well, I can't quite tell you, but something inordinately technical, who would talk about terms that half the set did not understand, but we could ask the chemist questions that would help her move her issue on, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, good question.
Yeah.
So is that?
Yeah, similarly, and the one I thought of was IT specialists, and I understood in terms of content, I understood about 5%, but I was there to hold the process. I could ask the stupid question that was really useful to make people think about the basics, and to encourage people to ask questions based on their expertise or questions based on their ignorance. So thank you, Kevin. That's an interesting question.
Okay. In that case, thank you very much, folks. Really great questions there. Thank you for being with us. We have got a closing poll now that my colleague Becky is going to post. We'd be really interested to hear from you. So if you can take 2 minutes, I think there's 5 questions. So if you're going to do it, you'd need to scroll down and take all 5. And I think they're really quick. And otherwise, as I said, you will be getting you'll be getting an email with the recording here. So feel free to wait for that, and it will be with you and on our site in a couple of days. So so thank you, everyone, and thank you for your time. Really appreciated it.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I was going to sign off and just close my screen while the poll comes through. Oh, 12. Well, it looks like we've got 100% participation, but it does look like possibly some people didn't finish to stay, I think. So on that basis, with 100% participation, I think we can close the poll.